Hi everybody, my name is Burton Seitler. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief, along with my co-editor Grace Jackson, of a new journal, a startup journal entitled JASPER. JASPER stands for the Journal for the Advancement of Scientific, Psychoanalytic, Empirical Research. Let me start off on a light note. Doctor, says the receptionist, there's a patient on the phone who wants to come in because he thinks he's invisible. Tell him, said the doctor. I can't see him right now. In clinical work, what we often do involves looking at what may, at first blush, be invisible, in an attempt to move from the unconscious to the conscious. We attempt to make known what is the unknown and to put into words, if we can, what was previously unspeakable. But how do we know that what we think we know is correct? In the past, knowledge came from four fairly general methodological approaches. Each individual, as Francois pointed out, is a hypothesis maker. They're constructing an experiment. Each person's own perceptual phenomenology determines what they sense, what they take in, and what they interpret, accurately or not accurately. The other method is the method of authority, in which the king, or the clergy, or the government, or the elders determine what is right. The third method is the method of tenacity. If it was good enough for Pappy, then it's good enough for me. Clang, clang. And the fourth method, which was an advanced method for its time, and still a pretty darn good one even these days, is the method of inquiry, sometimes called the Socratic method, in which you ask questions, and sometimes the questions or the quest is more important than the answers. Frequently we don't find answers, frequently don't find cause and effect. But if we can respect the process, then the answers will evolve on their own if they do. But the process itself is worthwhile. I am a New York City born kid, and so I'm used to traveling on the subway, and I used to travel on the subway when I was just a little kid. In those days it seemed safe, and our parents had great trust and faith in the world, and so I got around everywhere. And you know, sometimes I didn't always make it to my destination. Sometimes I got off earlier, or sometimes I got off later. But in each case, I learned something. I developed, they call a cognitive map. I learned the stations. I learned the order of the stations. I learned what to do in the process of getting to where I wanted to go. I can go anywhere in the world now with the confidence that I'll find my way, even if I'm lost. In fact, for me, lost only takes place on perhaps 2 or 3 occasions. I'm lost when my car takes me. I don't take it. It takes me. It has a mind. To a destination that looks a little seedy and a little scary, and it's dark, and the needle on my gas tank is pointing to empty, and I don't think it means enough. That's, for me, the feeling of lost. Or I have a meeting that I have to get to, and I'm going to be the speaker, and I have 1 minute to get to it, and I'm not really quite sure. I know I'm in the vicinity, but I'm not quite sure where it is from the point that I have arrived. That's lost. Anything else is an adventure. And that comes from a basic trust that I've developed over the years that my parents had in me and I had in them. Now, it wasn't all that perfect. My dad was a tough guy, and he worked on construction, and that's how he needed to survive, and he thought that's what his kids needed in order to survive, except we were different than him. We didn't need that, but that's another story altogether. Anyhow, the final method is the method that really starts to take a look at all of the previous methods, which really says, in effect, how do we subject what we think we know to some rigorous kinds of surveillance or inquiry or detailed analysis. And that's the method called the experimental method. Now, I bring that in here because I'm trying to tout the startup journal that I've just created. I don't know if you can see it from there. That's our logo. And this is our first protocol. This is our mock-up. It'll be a little bit smaller than this, but this contains all the seeds, the kernels, and the ingredients of what we hope will be the beginning of a very happy relationship with you, our professionals. Students will be welcomed, wholeheartedly embraced, because you are the future, and early career professionals will equally be at home, hopefully, in this journal. This journal is going to privilege what is called, oh geez, I'll cheat. What is called empirical. It's in the title. I made the title, I forgot. Am I nervous? Not a bit. Not at all. Yeah, if you believe that, I have this great bridge in Brooklyn. I invite you to come, and I could sell it to you very cheaply. At any rate, empirical in most people's minds has to do with quantitative or statistical. There's nothing further from the truth. It's absolutely nonsense. Empirical could involve quantitative measures, but it also involves qualitative analysis. And by that I mean careful, systematic, presented observations. And I'll tell you where those observations start. And this is one case where we can talk a little bit about causality with a certain authority. Those observations start in infancy, and perhaps before then, but at least infancy is a safe claim. The child is looking around. If you've ever had a child, or you could remember being a child, or you've witnessed the child of your sister or brother, or maybe a school child, each child looks around. They orient, and animals do this too. They orient themselves. They check things out. They're drawn to lights. They're drawn to various objects and things. They're forming hypotheses because they'll try something, and then they'll see if there's a reaction to it. The first something they try, it's not conscious, and it's not manipulative, but they learn quickly, is to cry. They come by this naturally. They cry. In most cases, the mother comes. The infant makes a connection. I cry, mother comes. That's their first direct, overt interaction with the world. And in so doing, they come to discover that the mother is dependable, that she's constant, that she's there for me. Now, it happens even before that, but that's clear and overt. The child looks up at the mother while the mother's holding him or her. And the mother's gaze at that particular moment is extremely powerful. And we now have evidence to demonstrate that. When a child's about 4 or 5 or 6 months old, they did the strange experiment. Are you all familiar with that? That's the most horrible experiment in the world. They shouldn't be allowed to get away with it. It's painful when I watch it. The blank-faced experiment, that's what I mean. Where the mother is interacting with the child, and the child is, laughing and giggling, and then all of a sudden the mother turns around and then comes back. And the child goes through a repertoire of reactions. First, the child starts to giggle and gets excited in the hopes of re-engaging the mother. Nothing happens. Then the child flails about. Nothing happens. Then the child rocks back and forth, and nothing happens. Then the child gets very upset and cries and is disturbed, and you could see at that point the child's rhythms are off. And at that point, the mother intuitively, fortunately, breaks with the instruction and re-engages in the child, and the child calms down. Now, I think that's an immensely important experiment and a horrible one at the same time. I don't think there's a person in the audience that I've ever witnessed, and I've seen this done several times where they show the film strip of that. I don't think there's a single member of the audience who doesn't get disturbed by this. Maybe a Nazi here or there might not be bothered by it, but I'm not so sure. At any rate, we need experimentation, we need research, we need the works of Francois, we need the works of Beatrice Beebe and her cohort of followers before her, Margaret Mahler. You know, one of the criticisms that has been launched against psychoanalysis is that we have no research to back up what we say we know. And nothing could be further from the truth. And Bertram Karen has produced a monumental book, which I've read 4 times, and each time I discover something new in it. And at the back of the book, towards the back, he has several studies in this, in which, there's the book, and it's a classic, and you ought to get it. And it is on sale. In which he demonstrates a number of factors. One, that psychotherapy, in particular psychodynamic psychoanalysis, has efficacy. It works. And he demonstrated this by teaching graduate students how to do it, working with psychotic individuals who had been labeled as psychotic. And a strange thing happened. I guess the graduate students didn't know that according to theory, they weren't supposed to be able to do this work, or 2, they weren't supposed to be able to get any good results, but they did. It's a funny thing, it's strange. These kids didn't know what their limitations were and didn't know what past theoreticians, including Freud, said could not be done. Freud did not believe that psychoanalysis could tackle schizophrenia. Well, many theorists since Freud have said, no, that's not exactly accurate, and I won't list all of their names, but, you know, Frieda Fromm Reichmann, Harry Stack Sullivan, a number of other people, Ann Silver, they've all demonstrated, and Bert himself, that you can work with people who are in the throes of psychotic kinds of experiences. And that's what we're here talking about today. But how do we know what we know is really the question I'm asking. So we need some sort of central repository, some sort of central informational clearinghouse under which that information is readily available. Now, we do have many, many journals, and so you're going to ask the question, why do we need one more psychoanalytic journal? Sure, that's what we need. Another one to add to our expense account. Most psychologists or psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, sociologists, therapists of all stripes really can't afford to buy all of the journals that are out there. And most, even if they could afford it, can't read them all. I mean, there's a preponderance of journals out there, psychoanalytic journals notwithstanding. So why do I propose to do the impossible by bringing in just one more psychoanalytic journal? Well, for 2 reasons. One, psychoanalysis, believe it or not, does not have one journal that is specifically devoted to research. We have research in lots of different journals, and you can go and look at the Journal of Psych Review, Journal of Psychoanalytic Inquiry, Psychoanalytic Psychologist, and on and on and on. They all have sections in there in which they have some research. And they were forced into that because the public was, you know, professions were trying to say, hey, we need some backing, because we're now up against the insurance companies, we're up against big pharma. Ooh, did I say that wrong? Sorry. We're up against the government and places like that, which are really cramping our style. And we have to really show, you know, that we can, something demonstrable, that we can really say, hey, look, we've got something, it works, look at this. And my second issue, which we've already started to work on, we have an early career professional who has dared to raise questions about, that has great implications. He talks about reverie. Reverie is a concept that Bion talked about in great detail. And it's what happens when a therapist listens to a patient and has a vision or an image or a feeling that comes over him or her and pays attention to that and starts to bring it into the session. Most good results, I think, occur in the spaces between the therapist and the patient, between the patient and the therapist. Something happens in that space. They call it the intersubjective space. Something happens between sessions. Something happens after the session, before the session, on the way to the session, before the very first session even takes place. When the patient finally calls up and says, you know, or somebody calls up on their behalf and says, you know, I got your name and we have a problem. Before that even takes place, people are thinking about it. They're in pain. They're trying to figure out, what should I do? So when they finally make that call, it's a very brave act. And if you don't call back fairly quickly, they lose their confidence and they either go to someone else or they just say, the therapy's not it, I'm not going to do it. It's all mumbo jumbo anyhow. And so the resistance increases. So therapy in and of itself is a powerful act. Most people recognize it. And even when the patient may at times be denigrating us, and that seems to be normal, they're having a sounding board. We're important to them. Now, how do we prove any of this? We have to demonstrate this by going through careful analysis and having, you know, various kinds of studies on this, so that we can't just be charged with the fact that, oh, that's all mumbo jumbo, or that's all theoretical, it's not true, there's no basis for it, you know, you guys always talk this way, and in fact it cannot be disproven. That's the so-called Popper critique. You familiar with the Popper critique? A fellow named Karl Popper, who actually liked Freud and liked psychoanalysis, believe it or not, said he, however, could not support psychoanalysis because, one, we didn't have any studies to support us, which turned out not to be so. He just hadn't read them. Or two, that the studies that we do have cannot be disproven. They do not pass the test of what is called falsifiability. Falsifiability is a statistical and experimental and methodological subject in which you ought to be able to render what you're looking at true or false, simplistically. And the way you do that is to measure it against some control group. Now, interestingly enough, Big Pharma, I did it again, look at that. I bet Big Pharma has found studies that support their cause. And so they walk them out in front of everybody, and they say, see, look, we have this thing called Prozac, and we can demonstrate that 52% of the people, it's only 52% of the people, have some sort of effect that in the direction of remission or alleviation of their depression. 52%. Are you kidding me? That's, I flip a coin, it's 50%. But this is 52. And 48%, the depression doesn't lift. They're in the control group. Well, a psychiatrist and toxicologist and researcher by the name of David Healy came along and said, I don't know about that 52%. I have a suspicion that the 52% occurred because the people who were taking the medications knew which group they were in. The group that really got the real medication and the group that got the placebo. So he said, let me add another group to this group. This is what makes research so fascinating to me. Most people think it's a dull, dry subject, but this is so cool. He says, okay, we have the group that gets the Prozac, we have the group that doesn't get the Prozac, gets the placebo. Let me add a third group, we'll call it the active placebo. Active in the sense that this active placebo group gets a medication or something like that that mimics the side effects of the real medication. Dry mouth, lightheadedness, slight dizziness, a feeling sort of kind of being a little bit out of your body. And 66% of those people in the active placebo group said that their depression lifted. Now, would you like to know the name of this active placebo? Because if you ever get depressed, I recommend you go right to your pharmacist. It's over the counter and you can get it. It's called Dristan. Any antihistamine will give you dry mouth or the rest of the symptoms. Now that's a great study, and that's a fun study, and it wasn't terribly expensive to produce. So how was it that the FDA allowed the Eli Lilly and other companies to put forth their product as being effective? Well, according to the FDA rules, and this is something nobody knows about, too many people, you only have to show 2 studies that are effective. David Healy worked for Eli Lilly for a time, and so he had access to their archival files. And as a result of his access to the archival files, he was a curious guy. He went in, he read the studies. One crummy, lousy, horrible, disgusting, negative study after another, all showing it doesn't affect anything, doesn't work. So what was working, he said? How did they even get to 52%? He said it must be a placebo. They think this is the real drug, so they get better. He did I don't know if it was him, but somebody else did a follow-up study after his active placebo group. They did a follow-up study, which is so cool. They told people, this is a placebo. This is really a placebo. This doesn't work. And it worked. Because something else works. Have you all heard of the Hawthorne Effect? Really fast. Bunch of industrial psychologists, not analysts, came into a set of factories. And they stopped at the first factory. They were hired to make the conditions better so that the employees would produce more. After all, in a capitalistic society, that's what you do. You produce more. All right. So they went in and they interviewed all of the employees one by one, and they determined that the employees had some gripes. And one of the gripes was, this is a factory. It's kind of drab. Could you repaint the walls? All right, And could the lighting, it's so dim and dull and horrible. Could you put in some better lighting? All right. So they brought their findings to the managers of the factories, and the management said, oh, that's not terribly expensive. We can do that. And interestingly enough, productivity shot through the roof. It's true. So they figured, all right, that one factory productivity worked, increased. Let's use this as a paradigm for other factories that we own. And they did it. They changed the lighting, they changed the color of the walls, and nothing happened. The Hawthorne Effect really had to do with the fact that all of the workers were interviewed, that management for a change was interested in them, that there was a human, personal relationship, and that had not been taken into account by the researchers. So my case is simple. We therefore need good research. They came back and found out what caused the Hawthorne Effect, and we've learned from this, and that's good. So we need to do research. We need to do good research, and we need to publish the good research. We also need, a la the Hawthorne Effect, to publish the bad research. I don't mean to put it in moralistic terms, good research, bad research. I mean research that works and research that doesn't work. We need to publish those results that didn't come out the way we hoped that they would come out. Now, a lot of researchers don't want to do that because, maybe their tenure is dependent upon it in an academic setting, or maybe their stature is dependent upon it with respect to prestige amongst their colleagues, and a number of factors. However, in spite of those objections, my journal, Jasper, intends to publish both studies that indicate something worked, as well as studies that indicate that something did not work. And there's a reason. It's not to embarrass the author. In fact, it takes a lot of guts for an author to admit, I thought this was going to happen, but it didn't happen. That saves future authors a ton of time, energy, and money, because now they don't have to go down the same road as previously. you know, as the previous authors had. This journal will also, as I started out saying, emphasize emphasize receiving manuscripts from new authors of any age, of any stripe, early professionals and students. Student work is to be respected because they are the future. I'm getting long in the tooth. I'm getting old. I'm not going to be doing this forever. I'm sorry I waited this long to do it now, but it took me a lot of courage to finally say, nobody's doing this. There are a lot of smart people out there. Why aren't they doing it? It must be they know something that I don't know. I think what they knew that I didn't know was that this is a tough project. Well, I didn't know that, so I just decided I could do this. And so I assembled a whole bunch of people, and I slowly, over many years now, got a bunch of the top people on my editorial board internationally. We represent people from Paris. We have people from Great Britain, from Oslo, from Buenos Aires, Berlin. What am I missing? China now, that's right, all of whom said they're interested in this project, as long as you spearhead it. Well, why don't you want to spearhead it? Oh, I'm too scared. These are brains out there. They're scared. Are you kidding me? I'm a nobody. I'm scared. However, I discovered something. It doesn't matter if you're a nobody or a somebody. If you do what you dream of doing, something happens. And whether I become the benefactor of all the acclaim that this journal is going to accrue me, it's not. Or not, doesn't matter. What's going to happen is that we're going to stake our claim, and our claim is that psychoanalysis has a place in this world. It's defensible without being on the defensive, and it has some valuable lessons to teach other people and to learn from other people. A little bit about myself, very quickly. I started out being psychoanalytically inclined probably ever since I was a little child. I remember having a terrible set of dreams that were recurring when I was 7 years old. And I was frightened to death to tell anybody about it and probably felt horribly ashamed to do so. And so I just sat down one day and said, I got to figure this out. So when you say that people are hypothesis makers and they're trying to figure things out, absolutely. These dreams were horrible. I would sit there at night, paralyzed, afraid to go to sleep, because I knew what was going to happen. The monster was going to get me. There's no doubt in my mind. But if I didn't breathe, and I didn't move my eyes, and I didn't show any signs of anything, perhaps then I'd be safe. I couldn't keep that up forever. I was a kid. I was tired. So I sat down and I figured out my dreams, and the dreams went away. When I got to college, I was in an abnormal psychology course, and just say it to me, it's all right. Polio. Oh, yeah. Well, that's true, too. There was another influence in my life. I had polio. And that was traumatic, but I'm not sure how to weave that into the story. But when I got to college, I took an abnormal psychology course, and the instructor said, as one of the papers that I want you to write, I'd like you to write about a dream, and I'd like you to analyze it. I thought, oh, that's cool. I get a chance to write about my old dream. I'll tell them all about it. And I did that. And I thought, you know, it was a good dream, but I didn't think it would. I was just trying to dispense with the assignment with something I knew about. And then I come back and I get an A+++. I was like, whew. And he came up to me and said, this is a very sensitive dream. When did you have this? And I didn't want to tell him I had it when I was 7. So I said, oh, yeah, it's a dream that's been on my mind for a while. because I was quite sure that he would never believe it, because I've told this to other people. He said, "You were 7? Come on now, 7? You were able to analyze your dream at 7? Okay, I wasn't 7. I was 700. Do you feel better about it now? At any rate, it was at that point I decided I was going to do some serious reading on this, and I read Freud's Interpretation of Dreams, probably the best book I've ever read in my whole life. I've read it 9 times. Each time I discover something I never saw in there before, and I'm sure they slipped it in when I wasn't looking. It's a great book. And Freud, all the kernels of Freud's future books are in that one book. It's all there. Whether you agree with Freud or not, this is a tremendous advancement. I mean, it was 1895, for God's sake. Then I went on to read some of Henry James's works, also on his own dream interpretations, and I was hooked. But my professors were telling me that there's a problem with psychoanalysis. Can you guess what the problem is? It's not empirical. You can't study it. You can't prove it's right. You can't prove it's wrong. It's circular. I thought, oh, damn. So I trained myself to be a behaviorist. Shh, 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 shh. Sorry, Bert. Shh, shh. And because I thought perhaps we could subject psychoanalysis to behavioristic paradigms, stimulus response. All right, and so I read about Hull, who talked about stimulus response. But then I discovered there was a problem that even Hull figured he couldn't overcome. You see, between the stimulus and the response, there's a dash. That damn dash has caused more problems for everybody. You know what the dash is between the stimulus and the response? It's the mind. And behaviorism only wanted to talk about behavior and measuring behavior. They didn't want to talk about the mind, because they couldn't measure it. What do you do about that? Oh my goodness. Well, I got a young guy who's measuring reverie. How the hell is he doing that? And I read his study. It's really brilliant. I sent it to 2 of the people on my board who are statisticians. And they said, this stuff holds up. I said, shoo. It's a good study. We can measure things. I think it was Stern who was able to measure the optimal distance, this is cool, between a baby and a mother, when the mother is holding the baby. All right, I'm lefty, so that I hold it in my right hand. All right? The optimal distance is about 18 inches. How did he figure this out? Well, this is too far, and the baby, it feels uncomfortable, held this way out. By the way, if a mother holds a baby out this way, do you have a diagnosis? Not that I believe in diagnoses. This is distant. The mother holds the baby in like this. Any diagnosis? Any ideas? You're suffocating the baby. That's no good either. So there really is an optimal distance, and he measured the distance. It's about 18 inches. I think that's useful and it's cool. Most mothers do it intuitively, but there's some mothers that don't. Beatrice Beebe discovered that there's an interaction between mothers and children. What she did was, through a new technique called split-screen photography, she took a look at the mother's face and the infant's face as the 2 of them are looking at each other. But you could see both faces on the split screen, all right? And she had mothers who were slightly depressed, and they were very, very easily slighted and given to feelings of rejection to start with. Okay, and the mother's looking at the baby, and the mother smiles at the baby, and the baby turns away. And the mother goes back to Dr. Beebe. She said, the baby rejected me. What am I going to do here now? And Dr. Beebe said, here's what you do. Just hold your gaze, continue to smile, the baby will come back. Oh, I skipped this step, excuse me, it's a very important step. The mother, upon seeing the baby turning away, went in closer. Baby turned even further away. Now the mother's really bereft, and she really went in for the kill. And the baby arches its back, which hurts babies, by the way. That's not a natural position. There's pain there. So for a baby to do that, the baby is uncomfortable. Baby arches its back. I'm not thrilled with it either. And moves away from the mother. Mother's convinced, this baby hates me. The mother starts with a proposition and goes and proves the proposition, unwittingly. Beatrice Beebe then instructs her, now I got back to where I am, just hold your gaze, don't move, just smile. And she teaches the mother the language of loving repartee, which is, ah, ooh, ee. Now, we would regard that as silly if we spoke that way to each other, but mothers do that with babies. And I've had that experiment with my own children and with other children, strange children. And I go like that, and they look up at me, and their initial stranger anxiety calms down a little bit. And they look at me, and I go, ooh, and they smile universally. There's something about that sound, I don't know what it is, and it would make for good research to find out what that does and how the baby is wired for it. I don't like that term. Wiring sounds like we're finished, we're done. And when people talk about genetics, that's what they're saying to me. I don't like that. There's an awful lot of changes that we now know about through research that indicate that we can change gene expression. So, I actually ditched my paper, surprisingly, because I thought I needed to rely on what I was going to read to you, that I was really married to my words. But I went off on a track that I think may have served us better. But there may be a couple of points here that I will have recriminations afterwards for not having brought in. So let me just quickly check them to see if I can find them. Otherwise, I think it's probably a good idea at this point to open it up for some questions. Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. Thank you very much.